So I'm here today with Ken, who is the still just about the president of the Baptist Union of Great Britain. Ken, do you want to introduce yourself and let us know what you're about?
Yeah, hi Hayley, and hi to all in the South Wales Baptist Association, anyone else tuning in, listening to this. I'm Ken Benjamin, as Hayley says. I'm the Senior Minister of Chichester Baptist Church. I've been here for 24 years. As also Hayley says, I'm currently the President of the Baptist Union for another 10 days, I think, well, at the time of recording. And I will be going shortly after that, at some point in the autumn, to play a role for the organisation LICC, the London Institute for Contemporary Christianity, to continue some of the themes I've been bringing this year as President. I'm married to Sue, and we have two now adult children. One, our son, is back from uni and with us during this lockdown time, and our daughter is in the Midlands in Stoke-on-Trent in the potteries, designing pottery.
Brilliant, thank you. So what's been your theme as President of the BU?
I've been bringing the message and the question, where do we grow from here? Believing that our God wants his church to grow, so it's a good question to think about and pray rather than being something I have a magic formula for, which I certainly don't. And asking as many churches as possible, would they dialogue with that question, where do we grow from here? Recognizing, I think, that if you look at the numbers and ask the question, where will our churches be in 5 years, 10 years time, if we simply keep doing what we're doing, and if we don't see a new revival, which I believe could happen, but we don't wait passively for that, or the Lord returning, which I believe will happen, but again, it's not something we wait passively for, where will our numbers be? And I think the honest answer is that our numbers will be aging and declining if we just keep doing what we're doing, Hayley. So it's a question worth asking, because God will build his church, he is building his church, but it isn't a given that that need happen in our stream of churches, in our time. And I'm a Baptist for a reason. I've got some convictions about that. So I don't want our stream of churches to miss out on that. So then I've been taking people through that prayerful journey, asking to look at the word we within that question and say, okay, let's pray, where do we grow from here? When I do that, I end up making it personal and saying, okay, where do I grow from here? It's ridiculous to think of church growth without thinking of personal growth. And then having made it smaller, I then make it bigger and think, okay, not just my church, but our whole nation, our grouping of churches, where do we grow from here? So then I then look at the word here and say, where is here? If we're going to grow from here, part of the hallmark of leadership is to take an honest look and description of the current reality. What are the unique challenges about here today? Not just in lockdown, but afterwards. There are some real challenges we need to acknowledge, but there are also some real opportunities about here. Having done that, then we can look at the word grow and pray about that. We can acknowledge that some growth we see in some of our churches, including mine, isn't real kingdom growth. It's just transfer growth from one place to another. We're not looking for that. That's a fairly neutral thing, kingdom-wise. We're looking for real healthy growth, which could be growth in Christ-likeness, growth in fruit of the Spirit, growth in maturity, growth in knowledge of God, and growth through people committing to and recommitting to and becoming more like Jesus. So we seek all of that. And once we've done that, then we can look at the word where. And within the word where, I'm not coming to you with all of the answers. I haven't been doing so for a year. But in my church, where I've been for 24 years, we've seen a couple of things be key. One has been emphasizing whole life discipleship, equipping people for all of their lives, which has never been more important than it is now, which should be a Baptist theme because we think all of our people are ministers, don't we, wherever they are. So I've been saying to churches, we will never get anywhere until we equip our people for their everywhere. And then secondly, looking at imaginative ways of gathering, that the times that we live in call for us to think beyond our existing patterns and programs in imaginative and creative ways. So in my church, we've been doing for 10 years missional communities, alternative gatherings, in addition to our main ways of gathering. That's a long answer to your short question, Hayley.
No, that's brilliant, thank you. Can I just pull up on that? You said your church in Chichester have been doing these missional communities. Can you just explore for me what that means? What does it look like?
So it's different in different churches, but in my church, we still carry on with our Sunday service when we're allowed to carry on with a Sunday service in a gathered way. But at that same time, a grouping of our people are out looking to create a way of gathering that still puts God at the centre, but has a realistic chance, prayerful chance of reaching people who foreseeably wouldn't be coming to any church in my locality. And sometimes that's based around an interest, and sometimes it's based around a need. So when we're allowed to, we have groups going into older people's homes, for example, to bring services. Now that's something that lots of churches do, but we're able to do that on a larger scale by moving that to a Sunday morning. By moving it to a Sunday morning, then a grouping of our people who would have been with us on a Sunday morning, once a month only, those who are leading it, can step out of the Sunday gathering and go and take a service in old people's homes. Now, by doing that, that's the time that older people would value that most, because they would view Sunday morning as the right time to do that. And it's also gives families and couples the opportunity to make different decisions. Some might like doing that, others wouldn't, but it hasn't cost any family or couples time if people are in couples or families. And it can work across ages. So people can leave their children in our kids' work and go and get involved in that, or kids can get involved in it. Some kids really like older people, some really don't. So it gives those opportunities. But equally, we have a group that go out mountain biking. Sunday morning's a time for mountain biking, isn't it? In South Wales and in my locality on the south coast in England. And so we call it mud, sweat and gears. It's fairly full on mountain biking. They go on a route and then they stop, they look at creation, they open up God's word, and they share and they pray together. And that has a realistic chance and does reach people who wouldn't come to our church. We take over a sports centre and we run sports for families and kids and parents and carers. And then we stop and do a half-time team talk across 2 different age groups. Again, reaching people who wouldn't be coming to any of our localities. We've reached a point, with 8 of those now, looking at a 9th, we've reached a point where 10 years in, we reach as many people through those 8 alternative gatherings as we do on our morning and evening service on a Sunday, not including our people who lead them. There or thereabouts. So it's not the magic answer. I'm not saying everyone should do it, but it's us just trying some things. And I think the times that we live in call for us to just go for some bold experiments and be open to amending, stopping, changing again if those experiments don't work. Because as I say, if we simply keep doing what we're doing, we could be in trouble here.
That sounds great. And everything within me gets really excited about that. And yet I also know what it's like to lead a church and to try and get established congregations and gatherings to change and do things differently. How did you find that in your church? What were the challenges in that?
I mean, there are challenges. My church has been wonderful. We did it slowly is the answer. For me, I'm a pastor, so I wanted to carry as many people with me as possible. So we conveyed the values. We did say things like that sentence I started with almost. If we keep doing what we're doing, I said, we may see some growth. Whether that's real growth or not, only the Lord knows. But we will never be the answer for a growing number of people who simply won't walk into our building. And we can't be okay with that. So what are we going to do about that? And we prayed about that and looked at it for years, maybe 3-4 years before we actually did anything. And I went to see some churches that were doing missional communities, alternative gatherings, other ways of gathering, fresh expressions, emerging church. It's got lots of names. I found, if I'm honest, that it's relatively easy to lower the bar on what it is to be church. It's relatively hard to lower the bar on what it is to be church and still raise the bar on what it is to be a disciple. But there were a few people doing that, I thought, and that's where we wanted to carry it. So our experience has been that some people who love change, early adopters, are really excited to begin with, but maybe don't stay the course. And others who were very reticent to begin with, very questioning of why Sunday, why do it this way, why can't we just encourage people to come to what we're doing, because we're already seeing some new people come to what we're doing. Some of those people now lead some of our missional communities. So we have about 70% take up, is to say 70% of our members now are involved in one of our missional communities. And some of those people who were really, really keen at the beginning are no longer in my church. They're in some other church. That's okay. That's just the reality. But we've gone slowly in order to carry as many people with us as possible. Also, I think the key for us has been none of those 8 missional communities, alternative gatherings, were my idea. I simply just conveyed the values and asked people what they might bring and what might fit in order to fit the idea of a bold experiment. Actually, if I'm honest, I did have an idea for an alternative gathering and we tried it and it completely failed, Hayley. So we tried it for 6 months to a year even, and a couple of different locations. I thought a pub-based breakfast discussion would go down really well, and it really bombed. So I've learned from that actually it's about the values, not the particular vehicle. And if people really own the value, like those who are really into mountain biking, who didn't know each other in our church, but gather it, then that's got a better chance.
That's fantastic. And these are called missional communities. So if you were to define mission, how would you define it?
Well, we normally say, because we don't think we've nailed the community aspect of it, that's the sort of broader title that most churches use. We generally use the phrase alternative gatherings because we're just gathering in a different way. And we don't think we've quite nailed the community bit, in the sense that most of our people still take part in our normal small groups and home groups rather than being communities in that way. But we define mission, I think, in terms of people committing to and becoming more like Jesus. And if we're seeing people on that journey, then we're happy. And that includes our people and others. But that includes the widest sense of what we then do to be more like Jesus, which includes reaching out to the lost and the least and the last and the little, as well as people finding their way into faith. So it includes conveying the love of God in action as well as words. But that's our simple definition to our church. And it's our criteria actually for whether we continue with something or not. Are we seeing people commit to and become more like Jesus through it? If so, great. If not, then let's rethink, amend, stop.
That's fantastic. Thank you. And your role as president for the past year has taken you all over the countries. And what have you seen amongst the churches? Where are you seeing God move?
That's a great question. So it's been a huge privilege. I've been to all 13 different associations. It was great to be in South Wales some months ago now with a couple of different churches and groupings of church leaders. I think huge variation, but overall brilliant people doing great things, probably doing too many things. So a lot of what I've been saying to people is to do less. Actually, in Baptist churches, we can do program, we can fill our diaries with stuff, but is it the right stuff, and is it the stuff that we've always done? Do less and do it well. And I've also seen huge variation regionally. So not just in Baptist churches, but across the board in the church world, the percentage of church attendance is massively different. Say, take South Wales or take Yorkshire, for example, compared with the South Coast. We're in a minority everywhere, but the proportions are very different. So the proportion of church attendance in, let's say, Huddersfield or Sheffield or Leeds, as an overall proportion of all churches in those cities, is probably less than attend my church on its own in my city as a percentage. And I hadn't really appreciated those variations, challenges in the northeast and northwest. One thing I have seen though is that everybody thinks their situation is particularly challenging. So people will come to me and talk about the particular challenges of small churches. And I've spent a long time with small churches, the particular challenges of larger churches. And I've spent quite a lot of time with large churches, the particular challenges of rural areas, the particular challenges there are in cities, the particular challenges if you're in a town rather than a rural area or a city. When somebody came to me, and they did, and said, you simply don't understand the particular challenges of middle-sized churches, I wanted to shout house like I completed my bingo card, because everybody thinks that their particular situation has unique challenges. And it does, but our variety is our strength as well. And as well as there being unique challenges, there are unique strengths. There are things smaller churches can do that larger churches can't. And there are things medium-sized churches can do that neither can do, and things larger churches can do. So we should bless each other and encourage each other rather than simply express the challenges and difficulties of our situation.
That's brilliant. So thinking about that, what do you think is brilliant or good about being a Baptist in those churches?
Wow, I think that the convictions that we have always had actually sit really well in today's culture. So people are reticent about misused authority, and people like shared ownership of something. And they also get the fact that we will, by conviction, wait on something like somebody expressing their faith through baptism until somebody is old enough to decide for themselves. So whilst we respect people from other traditions, it just happens to be a time where the convictions that we've always held about congregational discernment and discerning the mind of Christ together, when that's articulated to somebody who isn't somebody of faith, and our convictions about shared ownership and the key decisions being made when somebody is old enough to decide for themselves, sit really, really well in today's culture, which might be a little bit cynical of misused authority, which is not to say that we can't misuse authority in a Baptist context either, but if it's done well, it can also fit well in that context. I also think we're in a time where, again, not because we've done anything well, just we should recognise this is a particular blessing we have, where across the board in churches and kingdom-wise, we might be in a place where people trust us across the spectrum of the church world. In other words, many of the newer churches, so-called newer churches meeting in alternative ways, what we might have called house churches in years gone by, they will trust us as one of them and view us as modern, perhaps predominantly evangelical, charismatic type churches. They will view us as one of them. The traditional churches, in my city, the cathedral, the Catholic Church, some of the traditional Anglican churches, URC Methodists that have been there for centuries, they will view us as one of them as well. So we sit in a particular place where we can help kingdom unity or we can hinder it because of the way that we're viewed by others. So we have a particular strategic role to play at the moment, I think.
That's fantastic. And where do you see the future for this kind of missional communities? I'm saying that in the sense of alternative gatherings. For sometimes it can feel like a program in church, can't it? This has, yeah. And I recognise things have a season, but what do you feel is the next step for these?
Oh, I don't know, if I'm really honest. I think that the missional communities aspect has quite a lot of similarities with the whole life discipleship message that I'm bringing, in the sense that both, I think, should honour the gathered traditional way of doing church, but recognise that that's not the only thing. And actually, the majority of our lives are spent elsewhere, that we are Christians 24/7, and that God is there with us in all of those contexts. So I think we're in an experimental stage still, and what will emerge, I don't know. And I think we should hold what we've been doing, humbly, and recognise that it might not be completely the answer. So what it will go on looking like, we haven't nailed it at all. We're just trying some things. What it will look like, I don't know. I think if we're in a time when less people are likely to walk through our door, then it just makes sense to try some other doors as well. And if you're in a growing church, which I've been blessed to have been in 24 years, you can rest on your laurels of that because you're seeing new people come in. But we always need to have our eyes out to the majority of people who are not coming in and not going into any church in our city. So I think we'll go on experimenting with it. I think whatever people do, whatever they end up doing, whether they tweak and amend their current services or whether they try different ways of gathering, the thing that we're learning now in this time, and will go on needing, is to relearn our Baptist fundamental that we are ministers wherever we are, and equipping people as priests wherever they are in the whole of their lives. Then what we do when we gather becomes about equipping people for when we're scattered in a whole variety of places. I was thinking this morning that so much of our biblical teaching is about, and biblical examples are about people being scattered in places they don't want to be, actually. And yet they're still being called to be whole life disciples there. You know, Joseph and Daniel, and the New Testament instruction to whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for human masters, is to slaves as much as anything else. They're not necessarily good places. They're not places you want to be. They're places of a broken world, but God can use us there. So I think whatever we end up doing, our priority should still be pointing up and out, and we've been perhaps better at pointing in.
That's fantastic. You used the phrase there, whole life discipleship.
Mm.
Many of our churches and members of churches will be used to the phrase discipleship, of course.
Mm.
That phrase whole life disciple may be a bit new to some people. Can you just explain that for me?
Yeah, in an ideal world, we wouldn't need to add the phrase whole life on front of discipleship, because we would just, that would be what we mean by discipleship. I guess I want to go one stage back actually and say the word discipleship isn't in our Bibles. The word disciple is. So when we've coined a phrase discipleship, people have been free to make it mean whatever they want it to mean. And if we're not careful, we make it mean a super elite version of Christian, or a particular course that somebody does, or some spiritual disciplines that people follow. For that reason, it's helpful to add the phrase whole life, I think, to just simply explain we mean, what does it look like to be a disciple of Jesus? If the word disciple is in our Bibles, then a disciple in Jesus's day was simply somebody who followed him wherever he went 24/7 and was a follower of him. So for me, that then means, what does it look like to be a disciple on your front line, your place where you spend most time with people who aren't yet believers? What does it mean to be a disciple in your workplace, in your leisure space, with your family, with your neighbours? What does it mean to be a disciple in all of those contexts, and third places, you know, social spaces, and a whole variety of other contexts? If that becomes the deal, then we begin to accept that the answer won't be using our people's leisure time to recruit them in the evangelistic activities of the church, although we'll still do that and we still see some fruit from that. The answer will be equipping people to be bolder examples of Jesus in all of the places that they find themselves. When you do that, you end up, I think, knocking on the door of that organisation that I'm going to end up working for, LICC, the London Institute for Contemporary Christianity, because they're trailblazers in our nation, I think, for equipping people for the whole of their lives. And they use the phrase whole life discipleship or frontline or any of those phrases to equip that. Some of your churches have used some of their resources: fruitfulness on the front line, life on the front line, scattered and gathered, frontline Sundays are all good things. And others of you won't have come across their resources, and I'd recommend them to you. But then I'm biased, aren't I? Because I'm going to go and work for them. But I think that they're well worth a look, and they particularly fit our context, or at least should fit our context, as well as other churches too.
That's fantastic. And I don't work for the organisation, but I can vouch for Fruitfulness on the Front Line, and their resources are fantastic in local church ministry for equipping that. So thank you. Thanks. I wondered if I could ask you, what at the moment is bringing you joy?
Well, we're doing this interview in a time of lockdown, and it's frustrating for a lot of people, and it's hugely tragic for other people. So joy is in the context of sorrow. I've got a funeral later this week that is COVID related, a week today, in fact. So I'm very aware of that. But nevertheless, our God brings good from bad, doesn't he? And it's bad that he didn't create in a broken world, but he brings good from it. And so we are seeing people find their way to the things that we are offering in a way that we've not seen before. And we're also seeing people who were just on the fringes of leaving, or we might have been having a conversation about whether you should really be staying as a church member. I had a couple of those, and all of a sudden they've particularly engaged with what we've been doing in this season. So I think the blessing has been new people finding their way in, and there's a blessing to come, I think, of us having a more blank page when we're allowed to gather again than we've ever had before. And so before we press a simple reset, there's an opportunity to rethink and reframe before simply going again. I think we might see a couple of waves of people finding their way back to church when we gather again. I think those who found us online might be keen to try and find us in physical spaces. And I think there'll be such a media pressure to help the economy and get back to the things we're always doing. Some people won't find their way back to us straight away, but they will fill their lives with all the things they were doing before. And then they will see the emptiness of that. And then they might find their way to us in the months to come, perhaps in particular calendar seasons events. So I think we might see more visitors in Easter gatherings and Christmas gatherings because they know that what they've always filled their lives with didn't answer the question at the time of deepest need. So I mean, I'm encouraged by that, albeit an opportunity none of us would have wanted.
Thank you. And if you could, you say you've been in ministry for a while now, been at the church for over 20 years. If you could go back at just before your ordination and give yourself a bit of advice in retrospect, what would it be?
I was very blessed that I actually got that piece of advice from somebody else, and I've tried to keep to it. So I was at a ministers' conference, the first one. I was 2 months in, and I was finding the whole process exhausting, just trying to be nice to people as a Christian and as a minister. And so I hid away at this ministers' conference in a room that I thought nobody else was in, and actually it was big wingback chairs, and I didn't realise that there was another minister there. So I had to chat to him, and it ended up being the case that he had 2 months to go till he retired. So I was 2 months in, he had 2 months to go. So I said to him, "What advice have you got for me? Because I'm just starting here." And I honestly thought, Hayley, he would say, "Wear a tie and a suit," because we would just look so completely different. I was just trying to make conversation. I'd hoped to hide away in that room to watch the football results, if I'm honest with you. But then I realised I had to have this conversation with him. When I asked him the question, he was really surprised. Then he looked a little bit sad, and he said if he had his time again, he would complain less and get on with it more, because what we do is such a privilege, and we have enough money to live on to get on with it. And he said this, he said most of the things he's worried about have never happened in the end. So if he had his time again, he would complain less and get on with it more, because what we do is such a privilege. I've tried to hold on to that, and I would retell myself that if I was starting again.
That's wonderful. Thank you.